Guys, Americans are completely terrified of talking to each other in small, casual social settings. It's taken me a couple of years to figure out why. Well, it took me about a year to figure out why, but it's taken me another year to figure out what we can do about it. I'm in my woodshed today, and by the way, welcome back to Homesteading Off the Grid. We're having a morning ramble here, and this one's kind of deep. It's multi-layered. I think I've figured out the solution for a problem that most of us have not even admitted we have. I went to a birthday party a couple of days ago. It was for a small child, one of my son's classmates. My beautiful bride went with me dearly, and we saw some folks there that we met before that we truly do like, and then we saw a lot of folks that we've never met. A lot of people here in Albemarle County, Charlottesville area come and go. It's kind of a transient community because of the university. A lot of niche type jobs in the area. If you don't have a job with the university, then you probably work for the intelligent sector of the government. They've got all these super secret squirrel posts around here. But a lot of people come and go. A lot of people get transferred to another university if they do work for UVA, or if they work for this little part of the, well, certain parts of the government. They get transferred to other locations where these certain parts of the government are located. I'll just leave that at that. So, you know, even though maybe half the kids your kid went to school with last year are back each year, the other half might be new because their families are new to the area. So here's what I noticed. Tell me if you can relate to this. I bet you can. We go to the party. It reminded me of being back in junior high. It was like being 14 years old and being at a dance in junior high. I guess what they call middle school these days. That term junior high got switched to middle school, I don't know, maybe right around the year 2000. So if I say junior high, a lot of millennials might not know what I'm talking about, but the millennials would call it middle school. But you remember, you go there, the boys are on one side, the girls are on the other side, and everybody's afraid to talk to each other. But about halfway through the dance, you know, a couple brave souls start dancing and people start mingling, and by the end of the dance, everybody's having a pretty good time. It's the same way at this party. But the thing is, we're not a bunch of 14-year-olds. We're not a bunch of insecure adolescent teenagers. We were a bunch of insecure middle-aged adults. Now, you know, I've been back in the U.S. just over 2 years after living in Southeast Asia, the Philippines, for almost 6 years. Brought my beautiful bride with me, brought my son. I've talked, if you followed the channel regularly in the past, about how I kind of had to unlearn everything I'd learned for nearly 40 years when I was living in the Philippines. I had to learn an entirely new culture. I had to accept it for what it was. And in order to survive, I had to accept that my Western views and what I thought were Western parts of our moral compass, as far as here in the West go, were not parts of the culture there. And I never had to act outside of the bounds of my specific belief systems, but I had to accept the fact that I needed to protect myself from folks who would act outside of the bounds of my specific belief systems in relation to me. Now, what I just said there, that comment I just made, I'm going to use as a specific reason why Americans are terrified to even talk to each other and what we can do to fix it. With that comment I just made, you could read into a million different things, and many people watching this will. A lot of you are very intelligent, are loyal, faithful subscribers, are of above average intelligence. I know it because most of you comment in the comment section. you are able to think for yourselves. You do not think the way the machine, which is a combination of the mainstream media and the powers that be, they're working together. And this is part of, I'm going to explain this too. Just hear me out. We're not thinking the way they want us to think, and we're terrifying them. But this is how we can convince Americans to no longer be terrified of each other. Basically, what I just said was that the culture there is different than the culture here, and I had to accept that, and I had to know how to live within it safely. There's nothing offensive about that whatsoever. And when I meet Filipinos or Filipinas here in the U.S. and we talk about life over there versus life over here, they're never offended. Never. As a matter of fact, there was a wonderful Filipina lady at this birthday party who's been in the U.S. for 10 years, I think. Loved meeting her. Laughed harder than I've laughed in 2 or 3 years, because in the Philippines it's okay to laugh. You're not viewed as immature, weak. We laughed, and the biggest thing we laughed about, this has got me, her, and my beautiful bride dearly. We're talking about life in the Philippines, what it's like there, the things you've got to do just to protect yourself there that you would never have to think of here in America. And now here in America, you've got to think differently. There are ways you got to protect yourself here that you don't have to think of there. I'm not saying one is good and one is bad. I'm saying they're different. That's all I'm saying. And if you're reading more into that than I'm saying, guess what? You're part of the problem, but we've got a way to deal with you. And I'm going to get to that here at the end. But what made us laugh harder than anything was, actually, the Filipina lady said to me, she goes, now, you know, if any of these Americans here at this party, and these are educated, professional Americans, these folks have degrees from Ivy League colleges. But she said, if they were to hear us talking about how life is in the Philippines and the way you have to live there, they would be so offended, they would call us that big dreaded R word, you know the word I'm alluding to, and the facts are, they've never been there, they'll never go there. What we're saying is the truth, but they've been trained to think that they should be offended by what we say because it's different. Different. We're not saying good, we're not saying bad, we're not saying judgmental, we're saying different. However, these are the folks who allegedly champion the cause of all things different. I guess as long as the differences aren't factual. Man, I'm treading a very thin line here, right? And I'll tell you what inspired this ramble. Finally coming out and saying what I have to say. One of our fine subscribers left a comment in the comment section that was hidden as for might not be appropriate for approval, that inspired this talk, this morning ramble. And let me tell you what that comment said. It simply said, I love your channel, to the effect, I love your channel, I enjoy your channel. I came here by way of the annoying neighbor with the crayon video, and when I first heard you talking, I knew you had so much more to say, and I subscribed because I want to hear what that is you have to say. I read that this morning. It's been sitting in the potentially inappropriate held for approval section for I don't know how long. I hardly even look in there. Every now and then I'm like, oh yeah. Now, why would that be potentially inappropriate? This person didn't use any foul language. They didn't post any links. And guys, we don't link out. I could link out to my books on Amazon and probably increase book sales 1,000-fold. I don't link out to my stuff. I'm not going to link out to yours. So if you're typing links, you're posting news articles, oh, go read this, which, come on, it's probably a blog article you wrote. It's not going to get posted on the channel. It's going to be held for review, and it'll never see daylight. So anyway, I thought maybe I should say what else it is I have to say this guy. Now, you know why it's taken me a couple of years to pinpoint what it is I have to say, this being that Americans are terrified to talk to each other. 3 parts here. Number 2, this is why they're terrified to talk to each other. And number 3, this is what we need to do to fix it. You know why it took me so long? I had to figure out how to say it without like being locked up under the county courthouse or being completely kicked off of the internet for the rest of my life. And also, it took me so long to figure out how to say it, because, you know, it's raining right now. As of this recording, we're going through the heavy rains associated with Tropical Storm Florence, which was Hurricane Florence, which I think is now Tropical Depression Florence. 5 days ago, they were telling us that we were going to get obliterated and wiped off the map here in central Virginia. Now we're just getting some rain. But I'm making this video in my woodshed, as you can see from the wood behind me, as I did a little bit last week when we had some rain from the storm. And I was in here with my lantern and when I was making those videos, and it was all dark and eerie and looked all conspiratorial. And my beautiful bride was watching one of those videos last night, and she said, "Why were you in the woodshed?" And I said, "Well, honey, because it was raining." And then that one morning I heard a coyote out in the field, and I thought, my gosh, maybe that 300-pound black bear's out here too. I better lock myself up in the woodshed till it's light enough to see. She goes, "Okay, well, why are you sitting in the dark in the woodshed?" I said, "Well, honey, because the sun wasn't up yet. It was dark outside." And she said, "Well, why didn't you turn on the lights?" Once again, my beautiful bride to the rescue. So maybe if I thought a little bit more like her, maybe it wouldn't have taken me 2 years to figure out how to say these 3 things. Number 1, Americans are terrified to talk to each other, especially in just small social settings. Number 2, here's why. You remember McCarthyism and the Red Scare? Everybody was afraid that they would be accused of being a communist. They were, especially people in high power. Harry Truman knew that Congressman or Senator McCarthy was off his rocker. He knew there was nothing to this Red Scare. However, even Harry Truman, as president, was scared to speak out against McCarthy because he was afraid he would be accused. That's how bad it was. Folks, we're living in the modern era of McCarthyism, where we're all afraid of being accused of, now this is going to be broad, listen very closely, don't read into something I'm not saying here. We're all terrified of being accused of, we're all terrified that whenever we say something, the person we say it to is going to read into it something we did not say. Didn't I just tell you not to do that? Guys, you probably thought I was going to say that we were terrified of being called the big dreaded R word, or we're going to be afraid of being called the big, there's so many words people are throwing around these days, which are the new, the new menace, the new Red Scare. As I've seen it since I've been back in the United States for 2 years now, and as I'm relearning the culture, it's been a little more difficult because it's not the same culture I left nearly 10 years ago because before I was in the Philippines, I was in Iraq, I was overseas for quite a while. It's different. And I noticed the difference because I've watched movies that are only 15 years old. I've gone back and rewatched them since I've been back, where they've said things or made fun of things that you certainly couldn't get away with today because it's no longer considered couthful to do so. And this is only 15 years ago. So I'm not relearning a culture that I had unlearned in order to survive in a completely different culture in Southeast Asia. I'm relearning a lot of that, which I've unlearned, but I'm also learning the new aspects of the culture that have been introduced to the culture while I was absent, living overseas. But what I've noticed is people are terrified. It's not so much that they're afraid that they're going to be accused of being fill in the blank. You don't know what you're going to be accused of being because people are reading so much into everything that is not being said out of the simple little things we say. I'll give you an example in my own life. I learned quickly in my first 6 months back, I could not be specific when people asked me, "Wow, so living in the Philippines, that must have been interesting. What was that like? What were some of your most interesting experiences?" Well, I'd share those experiences, good, bad, indifferent, but definitely different. And these people would look at me and go, "Oh my gosh, I had no clue you thought that way. I had no clue you were that way." And I'd say, "What way?" And they'd say, and they just walk away. And I'm like, "What are they talking about?" Well, I think they were thinking some of those bad words that get thrown around so easily these days, they were throwing them at me, but they didn't want to speak them. So 6 months after I'm back, I learned to no longer just be specific. So here's what I learned to say. And now, I said this just a few days ago at this birthday party, and this is why I finally figured it out. I think this is why after nearly 2 years, I finally figured it out. There's no way to win here, but there is a solution. Now that sounds like an oxymoron, doesn't it? My gosh, you can tell I'm a writer, right? Only the likes of maybe Stephen King or Charles Dickens would say something like that. It's an oxymoron, but there is a solution, because isn't that an oxymoron? Hang with me, you're going to get it. Okay, so I'm at this party. Here's what I've learned to say when people say, "Oh, you lived in the Philippines for 6 years. That's quite interesting. What was that like?" Here's how I answer that question now. I say, you know what? You're right. That was very interesting. I had some very wonderful experiences. I had some not so wonderful experiences. I look forward to going back and visiting. I'm very happy to be back. This is a wonderful place to live, and I'm glad to be back. And then I'll switch the conversation to them, because I kind of want to get it off of me being the target. And, who likes talking about themselves? Guys that sit in front of cameras and make 18 to 22 minute long videos for YouTube. So anyway, I said this to a guy the other day who asked me about life in the Philippines. But I got the same response I used to get when I was specific, when I would give specific stories or examples. And he looked at me and said, "Wow." He says, "I'm sorry to hear you had so many terrible experiences. I know other people that have been over there and they've never had any of those experiences. I'm sorry to hear that you had those experiences." I called him on it, because you see what the guy was trying to do. It was, you're the problem. You are these things I want you to be. You think you can get away with me not being able to label you these things. Well, I'm going to label you anyway. I called him on it. I said, "Okay, did I just say to you that all my experiences were bad?" And it threw the guy, because I guess he wasn't used to people just kind of calling him to the mat like this. He's like, "Well, no." And I said, "Well, then don't put words in my mouth." And then I turned around and I walked away. And therein lies the solution. Guys, in summary, in brief, quick summary, during the Red Scare, the McCarthy era, people feared government agencies and people within government were going to accuse them of being communists. The media sensationalized it. And I talked before the hurricane came in about the Orson Welles broadcast, The War of the Worlds, and how the media learned that if they can sensationalize the one or two times something bad happens to get us to believe that it's happening all the time, they win. They sell their papers, they get their clicks, they generate their revenues, and we bought it hook, line, and sinker. We have now gotten to the point in American society to where we are so terrified not of being labeled something like they labeled people during the McCarthy era. It's gone beyond that. It has gotten to the point to where we are terrified of the 1 million different things people may read into the one simple comment we make, no matter how bland, plain vanilla, non-specific that comment is. We are terrified. And we're scared to talk to each other. We are scared to talk to each other. It's got to stop. It has got to stop. We have built this great divide ourselves. People attribute it to politics. That's partly to blame. They attribute it to the mainstream media. That's partly to blame. It's a combination, but it's ourselves giving weighted credibility to this monster under the bed that we need to drag out and expose to the sun, because that's the best disinfectant ever. Folks, by the end of that birthday party, I was still laughing. When I talked to that Filipino woman and my wife, and it put me in such a mood. The laughter was so boisterous. People heard it. Other people then began coming up to me, smiling and talking to me, and I met wonderful people for the first time I'd never met that I have things in common with. I met a wonderful lady that lives just a few miles down the road from me. Oh, I met two couples, both within just a couple miles of me, I'd never met before. We have so much in common. We laughed. We enjoyed the party. We had a great time. By the end of the party, everybody was laughing. Here's what it took. Just like at that middle school, what we old folks would call a junior high dance, it took a couple people brave enough to communicate, to talk, to interact, and to not worry about the nonsense. And you know what? That one guy that wanted to do that, the things I've just discussed, I just walked away. Guys, we have got to just walk away. The more you say, the more you have to defend. And when you say something that does not need to be defended, there's no sense in defending it. So if somebody wants you to defend, if they want you to prove your innocence, even though you're already innocent, no. Walk away. Do not defend what does not need to be defended. When you see that that person is like that, walk away. I did. And the next person I talked to was full of cheer and laughter and humanity. And man, that was the best time I've had in a social setting in a long time. And guys, that's the solution. That's the solution. We're just not going to tolerate it. We're not going to look for offenses that are not there. We're not going to create them. If somebody says something, we're not going to turn it into a million different things that it wasn't. Okay? Stop it. And if someone is doing it to you, turn around and walk away. Get in your car and leave if you have to. If we do this long enough and loud enough, it'll be like when I left America about 10 years ago, before I started my overseas stuff, people were not terrified. They were not scared to talk to each other. Guys, the only way we're going to fill this divide and come back together is if we talk to each other, and we've got to overcome this fear we have of talking to each other. Don't make stuff that people don't say. I mean, don't look for monsters that aren't there. It's that simple, okay? So, thank you once again for joining me for another morning ramble here at Homesteading Off the Grid. And if my beautiful bride ever watches this video, she watches some of them. She has the misfortune of hearing me talk all day long, so sometimes she doesn't watch these. But honey, if you watch this, thank you for reminding me that we have a light switch in the woodshed. We'll see you for more next time here from Homesteading Off the Grid.